I think prison does that to you. You
Hmm.
see the absolute, I mean, you look into the depths of evil. I, I I've seen evil. It exists at a level. I saw him giving a guy CPR at the medical center, and when they revived him and his heart started beating again, he woke up and he was screaming. And I talked to that inmate the next day, and he said he woke up seeing demons. But stuff like that it'll shake you. It'll get a hold of you and say, there's evil in life.
Dan, I think it's we've established the kind of people that I like talking to in these conversations.
Prison, bikers, extremists. That's sort of the genre.
Yeah, and if you check all three boxes, then hey, bonus.
Call
No,
us.
but so today we are talking to Michael Cantrell, who for nearly 30 years, this is a guy that worked in the American prison system, right? He was an officer, administrator, consultant. Now he's a writer and a speaker. He hosts his own podcast called the Prison Officer Podcast. But this is a guy who knows how prisons and corrections facilities work.
And he knows that because he's been through it all and he's seen all of it from the inside the system.
Did you watch Oz? Did you watch the show?
I did watch Oz. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have perceptions about prison and what things are like behind bars. And it comes from things like watching Oz or watching, various shows like that. But this is a guy who lived it. And he talked about, coming home at night and having to dial back his kind of like hardened, shell kind of personality that he had to have inside prison and kind of dial that back, right? When he's with the wife and the kids.
And playing the constant game of prisoners, of cat and mouse, of, what's allowable, what's not allowable, of stopping this crime and stopping that crime inside of prison, of keeping the peace, of, maintaining the order in the weird logic that prisons exist in.
Yeah. And I've said before, I think one of the reasons why I find this subject so fascinating is because prisons are about structure, order, politics, hierarchy, seniority, all of those things. So we'll get out of the way. We'll leave it to Michael Cantrell, who will tell you how all of that works. Michael, I find your line of work fascinating for a million reasons. But if you can you kind of take us to the beginning of your life in corrections, kind of the path and how you got to where you got to and what you do?
Sure. It's kind of an interesting story, and it actually goes back, when I was a kid, because my father was a firefighter. And so, my house was full of firefighters. It was full of police officers. I grew up around those type of guys, and I knew I was going to grow up and be a public servant. Probably. I mean, that was what I was going to do. I took a job overseas, and I became a cook. So I came back after a contract was over, and I'm looking around for a job, and this thing pops up in the paper and says, Missouri State Pen, cook needed. Sounds like something I can do. I've been working, institutional military-based cooking. And so I applied. About 2 weeks later, I get this phone call. We don't need cooks. We need COs. I said, what's a CO? I mean, I literally had no idea. I hadn't been around prison, didn't know correctional officers. But in my mind at that time, I was like, well, this sounds like public service. So I went ahead and I signed on the dotted line, went to work at Missouri State Pen, which, if you don't know, was built in 1838. And at the time, it was known by Life magazine as the bloodiest 47 acres in America. It was a penitentiary with more than 3,000 inmates in it. We had assaults every day. We had staff assaults every week, major killings monthly. So, I mean, I went from 0 to 100.
What was that like?
The drop of a hat, you know. Well, and I came from a small town. I was not prepared. Okay. I'm like a lot of people. I fought every Friday night up on the square in high school, I'd been around violence, right? You haven't been around violence till you've had somebody take a shank or their fists and try to kill you. That's a whole different, and you have to process that. I've never had anybody do that before. We used to just, fight until somebody got hurt and we go, okay, shake hands and see you Monday. But once I walked in that prison, I saw violence at a level I've never seen before. I saw manipulation of humans at a level I've never seen before. Of course, I mean, everything that goes with it, sexual assault, um, just the depravity of humans, at that level, when you're in a penitentiary at that level.
When you were done with your first week of work, or maybe even your first night of work, and you had some time to decompress and think to yourself, what were you thinking?
I don't remember decompressing. I remember full-time adrenaline. I mean, there was never time to really stop. I'll tell you a little story. I've talked about this before. My wife, at the time, we'd just gotten married. So I go off to work, right? I go off to the academy for a few weeks, and I'm inside that prison up there. And in my mind, I'm just trying to make it. And I come home, and we live several hours away, and I come home, and I walk in the door, and my wife backs away from me. I said, "What's wrong? Come here. I haven't seen you in weeks." She goes, "Don't posture me like that. I don't like that." I'm like, "What do you mean posture? I'm not posturing." She said, "You are posturing me, and I don't like it. Quit it." And I did not realize how quickly I had changed. I didn't realize, your head's on a swivel. You're watching everybody's hands. There's violence all around you, and it changes you. I was a pretty happy-go-lucky guy. I was just a kid, not too far out of high school. I was 21 when I started.
So, yeah, I mean, most times when you talk to people who work in prisons, there is the natural, like, law enforcement, military, security. So, like, but you didn't have any of those things. You kind of came in cold.
I thought I was going into public service, and I found out real quickly that the public does not look at correctional officers as public service. Right. Matter of fact, in order to forget the people they've locked away, because you have to understand, there's not a correctional officer in the country that put anybody behind bars. We don't do that. We're just keeping them there. We're keeping the public safe in our mind. We're making sure that the bad guys, the boogeyman's not under your bed at night. And the public looks at us and they think that we're the problem. We're the ones doing this and causing this. And in order to forget the people they put away, forget the people that they put in prison with their justice system, which is mine. I'm being, I'm just trying to make a point here. They forget us. And that's why we're called the forgotten cops. Because when I come out in public and I go to the 7-Eleven, I don't get the discount. I don't get the free coffee. Oh, you're a correctional officer. And more than likely, somebody in that 7-Eleven knows somebody in prison. And so that's a whole different deal. When you're a cop, you show up, half the time you're good, half the time you're bad. Depends on what side of the argument you're on. If you're a firefighter, if you could save one stick of wood and keep it from going to the next house, you're a hero. There's not people looking bad at firefighters. So that was something to understand, was this public perception. And we mentioned it just before we came on about movies and media. I mean, what's a good correctional officer in any of the movies you've watched?
Mayor of Kingstown.
You think? Okay.
I mean,
it's a good show. Yeah.
Well, I mean, good.
Go on, Andrew.
Oz. I mean, I've seen them all. Yeah. I was, is there any of them, or do any of them get it right? I guess.
I'm gonna blow your mind here a little bit.
Okay.
If I have to pick one media example of correctional officers, I'm going to pick The Green Mile. And I know that's a fantasy movie. I know that, all that stuff doesn't have anything to do with it. But when you take a look at the officers in that movie, Tom Hanks is that solid guy doing the right thing, trying to make it through, leading. He's a good leader of people. You see those inside. You see Bull, Brutus, and he stands in the background. He's this tough guy. He gives them what they got coming, not one thing more, but he's a solid worker. You got the old man that's running around worried about policy and retirement, right? He's getting close to the door. And then if you'll pay attention, the rookie, and this blows my mind every time I go back and look at it, that rookie is always looking up to those other guys because he's constantly searching in that movie on where he's supposed to fit in. And then, of course, we've got the 1%. And every prison, every jail has that 1% Percy. You know, we try to weed them out. We want them out of there. We know the inmates want them out of there. I know the public wants them out of there, but we want them out of there because they cause 90% of the problems inside the prison. If you've got a Percy running,
I think that 1% causes 90% of the problems anywhere in any.
Sure.
Yeah,
Right.
Just probably a little more magnified in prison.
So,
right.
So you were in Missouri.
That's where I started.
Okay, so take us through kind of where it went from there.
I stayed there for a couple of years, a little over 2 years at Missouri State Pen. I got the opportunity to move closer to home, so I went to a minimum, a work release camp. But
Right.
I was running. I was on the statewide SORT team, SWAT team, whatever you want to call it. We called it C-STAR, Correction Special Tactics and Response. And I was running a Bloodhound team, and I did that for the next 5 years. That was an interesting part of my career, mainly because I got to interact with the public in a way I didn't anywhere else. We got to go to parades. We passed out coloring pages. The kids knew the names of the dogs. You know, we got
And the
to go out
Bloodhound team, that's designed to
track. It's
yeah, that's
there
what I
to
figured, yeah.
track the escaped inmates. But we got to go out and find a elderly boy or a boy with autism who got lost in the woods. I got to help find a couple of walkaways that were elderly from nursing homes. Stuff that you don't normally get to do and help the public in corrections. So that was a very rewarding time there. So I didn't spend a whole lot of time inside. You know, I didn't do much at the minimum. From there, well, they walked in one day and they said, "We're tired of buying dog food. We're getting rid of the dog team." So thankfully they did, or I'd still be there as a sergeant because I loved what I was doing. But that kind of forced my hand. And a couple of my friends had went to Federal Bureau of Prisons. So I applied there. I got picked up at Leavenworth. I spent the next 2.5 years back at a penitentiary now, and a major penitentiary at USP Leavenworth in Kansas. You know, of course, that's well known in movies and everything. So it's kind of got its own history with it. I did that for a 2.5 years. And then I went to the Federal Medical Center for Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. And that is a whole different animal from anything you've ever seen or heard about. You know, a lot of people that have been there: Birdman Alcatraz, John Gotti, Jared Loeffner. A lot of the old mob guys came through there towards the end of their life. The Pajama Don, Gigante, he was in there, and you know, still trying to act crazy, which was his thing, until you listen to his phone calls. And then he was talking to his family just like a normal person. He wasn't crazy. But so I got to see a lot of that. And then about a quarter of the population of the inmates there are mental health. It's the cream of condensed mushroom soup of mental health inmates in the Bureau of Prisons. It's the 200 worst. And so use of force is every day, but it's not like gang fights. It's not like that type of stuff. It's forced medications. Those guys were trying to hurt themselves constantly, or just losing their mind and trying to hurt others. I saw a lot, 14 years there.
So when you say the folks with mental health issues, I mean, like I just think about like the Hannibal Lecter types that are like, you know, wearing masks.
I think about Vacaville in
like, is
California.
that accurate, or is that, again, have I fallen victim to the Hollywood scripts?
I didn't have anybody that was actually a Hannibal Lecter walking around in a mask.
Yeah.
But these are the most violent combination of violence and mental health in the Bureau of Prisons, really.
Okay.
Some of those guys were there they're going to end up their life there, because you can't turn them loose. You can't do anything with them. You know, there's an inmate down there, and I swear to God, he's 6'5". He weighs 325 pounds. He passed away a while back. And I'll just say his name was Charlie, and huge inmate. And when he did get a hold of staff, I mean, literally he could lift you off the ground. His hands were twice the size of mine. He was just a huge human being. And one moment you'd be talking to him like this, and I don't know how much cussing you guys do on here, but the next moment he would look over and say, "I'm gonna fuck you," and I mean, it would rattle the doors. He was this huge man, And I'm 6 foot tall, 270 pounds. I go, oh,
Yeah.
Make me flinch. But we had guys like that in there. And then we had just guys that just hurt themselves at a level most people can't imagine. Cutting their testicles off, gouging an eyeball out. They're so far out of it. Watched a guy who licked the floor so much he took off part of his tongue. Yeah. So that level of mental health.
I mean, when you're there, what about fear? Like, does that come into? I mean, I'm sure early on you probably learned quickly that you can't be afraid, but like, I mean, come on.
We're all afraid at times. The
Yeah.
thing we've become very good at is putting on the armor. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can be just doing this inside, but I can't let you see it.
Sure.
Right. Because everybody loses the confidence, not just my staff around me, but the inmates. And here's something that people don't understand about prison. A large percentage of the inmates are there to do their time. I'm there to protect them so that they can go to school, so that they can do reentry, so that they can get their GED, so that they can go through their day without getting sexually assaulted or beat up. The largest percentage of the inmates just want to be left alone. They want to go to the library and read a book. They want to go to rec. They want to do their vocational classes, and they just want to get out when they get done with their time. So I'm not only there to give confidence to the people that work with me, but to give confidence to those inmates so that they're not being preyed on, that they have someone who's there to protect them. And I think that's something that's lost in all the telling of movies and media.
You mentioned earlier that it's the 1% of, COs that cause 90% of the problems. Mm-hmm. And also through TV and movies, we're led to believe that all the bad things you mentioned about the prison population, the prison experience, sexual assault, sure, violence, that seems, according to media, super widespread. Is it the same thing as it is with correction officers? It's a smaller percentage of prisoners causing most of the problems?
It is a smaller percentage. Now, it's a smaller percentage. Mm-hmm. I'm looking maybe, 70, 30, 60, 40, mm-hmm, because you do have a large portion of the criminal population, sure, that they're criminal and they come to prison and they become criminally educated. It's college for criminals, for gang members. And so there is that portion. And that's what we're protecting the other portion from. So yeah, it's not all of them. And that's a hard thing because you want to get in there and you want to get hard, mm-hmm, in your heart and your soul and everything, and treat everybody like they're worthless. And you can't do that because not everybody in there is worthless. There are some people that are worthless. There are some evil people in there, some dangerous criminals. But you got to give them each. Is there
sort of game that the worst of the worst play with sort of the best of the best with the COs? Like, is there take us inside that sort of power struggle between prisoners, the ones who are trying to cause troubles and try to regain more control, and you guys?
Yeah, it's like anything on the streets. Mm-hmm. It's money. Okay. We talk about black gangs, white gangs, Mexican gangs. And yes, they split up on race and they will fight each other and stab each other to death over a racial issue. But if two of them gangs can come together and they can make money off the drugs coming in over the fence or through the door, they'll work together all day long. So it's very much oriented towards money, and money equals power. Those are the two things that those gangs are after. They do come after the officers just the same. Sometimes it's manipulation. You'll see young officers come in and you'll have one of the gang members walk in and he'll stud up, and he'll walk up to him and go, "Hey man, I want you," and the officer goes, "I can't do that. That's against policy." He says, "You'll do it or I'm going to just take you out here." And the officer goes, "Well, I'll call an alarm." He says, "Yeah, you might, but I'm going to get 3 minutes with you before they get here." And they intimidate him and they scare him. And now he's got to start thinking, what do I do? And you feel alone. I mean, I've been in mm-hmm. housing units, Leavenworth. I would work a housing unit, one officer to 100 inmates. Yeah, that's not abnormal. It's not abnormal for guys in county jails right now. So you have this nervousness and you've got to put that face on and you got to stand there and face that fear so that they can't back you down. The hard part is turning that off when you go home.
Yeah. One of the things that's one of the reasons why I've always found kind of like the whole prison culture universe so interesting is because, like, once someone goes into prison and that door shuts behind them,
Hmm.
there's an entire ecosystem, economy, class system, uh, you know, an entire, like, a hierarchy. There's an entire operation. It's
Sure.
not just, 3,000 guys in blue shirts that say DOC on the back, right?
Mm-mm.
Can you talk a little bit about watching people come to prison and learn how all of that kind of like infrastructure works?
Well, like I said, they're criminally educated. They teach each other. They teach each other. Um, and I was talking to somebody the other day about this. An inmate had been writing a friend of theirs. I said, well, yeah, that happens immediately. As soon as they walk in the door, they pull them aside and go, dude, you're going to need some money on your accounts. Figure out some addresses, call home, get some addresses for 6 people you knew in high school, preferably girls, and get on the phone with them and start writing letters to them. And these guys will be writing letters telling all of them that they love them, that they're going to marry them when they get out. You're the only thing I've thought about. And by the way, I need $60 put on my commissary account or they're going to kill me next week. And it's criminality. It's
Yeah,
just like a fraud on the outside, except each of those girls doesn't know what's going on. And it could be guys. I mean, I'm just using girls for an
sure.
example, but they're taught that. It's not something that just happens organically. They sit them down and they say, don't go to those showers. Don't go to that TV room between these times because that's when basketball's playing. And the Crips, they have that TV room during that time. If you go in there, you could get stabbed. They give them the rundown when they walk through the door. And if
And
they listen, they can probably get along. If they don't, they learn the
yeah.
hard way.
Well, and are there instances where, like, someone goes in and
Mm-hmm.
they're getting the rundown from someone about how things operate here when the reality is they're being manipulated? That is not how things operate here. They're just trying to, you know, it's all a manipulation. Like, they're constantly trying to play with each other.
They're gonna, if you're white, the white guys are gonna get a hold of you. They're gonna bring you in. If you're black, the black guys are gonna get a hold of you. They're gonna bring you in. If you're gay, those guys are gonna bring you in.
Yeah.
So because numbers is power. So I don't know that you're gonna see that from within their own group
Mm-hmm.
unless they push away from it. It's really hard. There are very few inmates. I've seen half a dozen who could walk a yard independently by themselves. Everybody owes somebody inside. That's the number one
What's
thing.
behind those guys? What gives them that freedom?
It's kind of like a correctional officer. It's kind of like the guy on the street that you see and you just know they carry themselves. You
Mm-hmm.
know, those guys don't bother anybody. They don't want anything. They don't go in debt. Debt is the number one thing that hurts a person when you walk in, because when you walk into prison, you have nothing. We give you a bar of soap. It's state-made soap, but you want a bar of Irish Spring because that's what you've always been using. Hey, I can get you a bar of Irish Spring, but you'll owe me 2 when you get your money. That never quits. That you never catch up. Once you start going in debt to individuals, to gangs, to whatever, you're always going to owe somebody. And so those guys never do that. They live off dirt if they have to keep from ever, you know, which they don't. I mean, the state provides everything you need to actually live, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not what humans want. We want what's comfortable.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sounds like living and surviving could be two different things.
they are. They are. Absolutely. Yeah. And some people want more comfort, you know. Those old gangsters, as long as you didn't mess with the pasta that got stolen from the food service, because that's what they would take back to their cell and put in hot water. As long as you didn't mess with that, they didn't care about anything else in the prison.
So as a CO,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure it was different depending on where you were, but what was kind of the philosophy of like we have to coexist with these guys. Either we can work against them, we can work with them, we can work in tandem. Like, what's kind of the dynamic? And I'm sure that depending on where you are, different people have different attitudes. But what was your kind of approach to all that?
Well, I grew over the years, so it changed. It absolutely did. Now I teach classes, and controlling inmates inside a prison is a form of leadership. It absolutely is. Okay. And in order to lead people, you have to have influence. And in order to have influence, you have to know the people that you're around. The problem I see these days is we want to run these prisons from arm's length, right?
Yeah.
And you can't do that. When I came up through this, I walked the yard. The inmates knew my name. I knew who they were. I knew who they talked to. I knew where they hid their stuff. I knew where they got their pasta from. I knew where they, who sold hooch on that yard, who was the drug dealers on that yard. But when something kicked off, I could go talk to an inmate because I didn't wait until it kicked off to have influence with him, to be able to have a conversation. And that's something I think is missing these days inside our prisons. We're waiting until it happens and then trying to talk to somebody. And that doesn't work on the street either. If you've got a neighbor that's got a dog, that barks all the time, don't wait until you just can't take it anymore. You got to get to where you know them so that you can go over and talk to them rationally and say, hey, this bothers me. Can we do something together to fix it? And that was as I went into, because I went up in lieutenant captain, I ended up as a chief out of Washington, D.C. when I retired. So as I grew, I learned more and more of that. Some of it I did early. I didn't have a name for it. It was just walking and talking. It was knowing your inmates. And when I first got in there, I'd have the old heads, they'd pull me aside and we'd walk up to the top tier, and then we'd just lean on the rail. We'd stand there for 30 minutes and I'm just kind of waiting. And he'd go, tell me what you saw. I'm like, what? Tell me what you saw. And I'm not sure what you're talking. Did you see that guy walk in there? You see that guy standing there watching the door? What's going on inside that cell? Why is he worried about people walking past that cell? Did you see the guy that had his shirt lifted up? And it was just the old officers teaching us that kind of stuff that made the difference for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's kind of like sorry, Dan, let me just say this real quick. It's kind of like, in policing, right? In America, they talk about how it's like, we need beat cops again. Mm-hmm. People don't know what's going on in their neighborhood because we don't have beat cops walking the beat, getting to know the local people in the neighborhood.
Sure.
And it sounds like you're talking about the same concept in
the only time you see the cops is when the car pulls up.
Yeah.
You got confrontation to start with.
Maybe this is naive, but like I hear you saying, like, we know who's selling the hooch, we know who's dealing the drugs, we know who's, why is that allowed to happen if you guys know who is dealing drugs? And I know that's a totally naive question, but
it's not allowed to happen.
Right.
You are one person watching 100 people,
Mm-hmm.
and we catch stuff all the time,
Sure.
But if you walk into a mall with 100 shoplifters, right, and everybody's a shoplifter, or say half of them are, say 50
Mm-hmm.
of them are shoplifters, you're going to get all the shoplifters when it's just you watching them? You're not. So, I mean, and you're being manipulated by all of them. They work
Mm-hmm.
together, Hey, boss, come over here. This broke. And I stick my head in his cell to see what broke, Well, while I'm doing that, the guy over here is moving hooch from the bathroom over to this vent, They distracted me on purpose. But we catch stuff every day. Every shift, I caught weapons. I caught hooch.
Sure.
Yeah. It's just, there's so much.
Is there any kind of, any kind of credence to the concept of like some of this stuff is just going to happen to maintain order?
I've seen people with that attitude. That was never my attitude, because, and that goes for everything. If I turn my head and allow this to happen over here, I just gave permission to all 99 other people in that housing unit to do it.
Right.
That's the way I always looked at it. So, I mean, I went after it. They paid me for 8 hours or sometimes 16 hours worth of work. I put it in. I was looking under trash cans and behind bulletin boards and trying to find shanks and smelling for hooch. And it gets to be a game. It gets to be a game. One quarter at Leavenworth, there was 3 of us rookies, and it's a 3-tiered housing unit, right? So there's A1, A2, and A3. 3 rookies working on evening watch, and we kind of got together and we're like, hey, let's see who could find the most shanks this quarter. I lost with 103 that quarter.
Wow.
Yeah. A guy that ended up going over to ICE or Border Patrol, he transferred out, but he found over 110. Yeah. So it's not that we don't, it's just that you're just overwhelmed. I mean, the numbers.
Sure.
Yeah.
Has there been shanks everywhere and just overwhelming criminality everywhere? Have you ever been in a position where you're a situation where you thought, I'm not getting out of this, or this could be it?
A couple.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple. I remember one very, so I'm out on the yard at Missouri State Pen, fairly new officer, maybe a year in, and the alarm goes off, and nobody saw exactly what happened when the officers got there. We responded to the under the tower, and so we get there, and there's an inmate laying there, bloodied up, stabbed, and so they kind of figure out who did this, right? And I'm walking the yard, and I look, and I see a guy, and he's got some blood on his shirt, and he's walking real quick. So I'm like, okay, and I said, hey, come here, and he goes, fuck you, back off. I'm like, whoa, I probably got something good here, So I keep approaching him. There's other people in the yard, nobody with me at the moment. And I said, come here. And finally I get up on him, and I put a hand on him, and he turns around and throws a punch. I wrap him up. We go to the ground. I'm trying to keep a hold of him, and the tower, of course, is called, officer needs assistance. And so the other guys are coming. And they get there, and they get him cuffed and get him off of me. And they reach down, and the shank that he'd just used, they just pulled out of his pants. And I remember just sitting down on the little ledge there and just going, wow, he had that with him. I mean, when I tried to stop him, I didn't realize it was still there. And what kept him from trying to pull it out and stab me, So yeah, I've had times that made me go,
So I one of the things that's fascinating to me is kind of like, the officer inmate relationship. And can you talk a little bit about what that's like? I mean, obviously, you were talking about how it's important to kind of, walking the yard and understanding who these guys are.
sure.
But they're also there. They're there for years, and you guys are there for 16 hours a day. You are working together to some extent, right? Like,
Absolutely.
just talk a little bit about that relationship, the dynamic, how it works.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've heard this on every prison movie, prison show. Respect. It's all about respect. In order for me to work with an inmate, and people, when you say the word trust, everybody goes, whoa, you can't trust an inmate. I can trust him this much farther than not trust him. Do I trust him like I trust my brother? Do I trust him like I trust, people that I've known for years? No. But there are inmates that I trust more than others. Ones that I can actually, I can count on him to finish a project. I can count on him to tell me the truth 99% of the time, right? And so there's a little bit of respect like that. There's inmates who, they don't have a need to lie to you. And I can't tell you that I've ever lied to an inmate. Once you learn how to say no, you don't have to lie anymore. And that's a hard thing for humans. It's a hard thing for humans on the outside. But when you have to start making up stuff, hey boss, I want to do this. Well, the lieutenant said that you can't do that. Why? No, you can't do that because this is my housing unit, and we're not going to have that type of behavior in here. Now I just gained respect. They know where I stand. They know who I am. And I don't try to change myself, which is the worst thing that somebody can do when they go to work in corrections. You're this person on the outside, and you want to put on a different mask when you walk inside. They see through that every day. These guys grew up with manipulation. That's what criminality is.
I think you hit on something that is really interesting, wherever you are, and it's how to say no the right way. And I think, humans are very bad at that. I have been bad at that throughout my life. Like, for anybody listening or watching, like, what's the best way to say no? How do we say no well?
The first thing is to know who you are. Once you know who you are, no becomes easy, right? Don't live your life trying to make other people happy. Okay. That's the first step. This is who I am. I will do this. I won't do this. There shouldn't be any waver in there. Now, can you have a conversation with somebody and maybe see their point and learn, different things? But know who you are at your soul. Know if your ethics, if your honesty are true and they're solid, no's easy.
Hmm.
I can't do that. That's against, what I believe in. I don't believe in letting people do that. I don't have to always blame, the boss or policy or something. You're not going to do that in this housing unit because it's not right and it's not who I am. And I was a big old country boy. I mean, and I'm sometimes dealing with guys out of downtown LA or Brooklyn, and they're city boys. But across all those boundaries, racial, geographical, you can still tell if someone's trustworthy, if they're honest, if they're authentic. I think authentic is the word.
It takes courage
Yeah.
to be pretty authentic,
It does.
in that way. Yeah.
It takes courage to walk into a prison.
Very true.
So you've already got courage. Now you just have to apply it.
Yeah. What you're talking about is kind of like, it's almost a stoic form of philosophy, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And I think prison does that to you. You see the absolute. I mean, you look into the depths of evil. I've seen evil. It exists at a level. I saw him giving a guy CPR at the medical center, and when they revived him and his heart started beating again, he woke up and he was screaming. And I talked to that inmate the next day, and he said he woke up seeing demons. And yeah, spooky, And but stuff like that it'll shake you. It'll get a hold of you and say, there's evil in life, which means there's good in life. And I have
it sounds like
good.
Situations like that really push you to understand yourself as well as you can. It's almost
absolutely.
like a survival mechanism is knowing yourself in that way, right?
Yes. And like I said, being authentic to who you are. I knew guys that were devout Christians who were correctional officers. And if they'd have walked through the door, studding up, trying to use cuss words that they don't at home, they would have looked at him and they'd have laughed at him. But these guys came in with true empathy, true compassion, true Christian values, true Christian morals. And when inmates needed something, they answered them in a Christian way. And they were respected because they were authentic.
It's an interesting point, because I was going to ask you, you mentioned compassion, and something you mentioned earlier on was you were talking about the rehabilitation of some of the people behind bars. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think a lot of times that is completely overlooked. And, so that some of the goals for people who are in prison is to rehabilitate, right? To fix what may have been gotten there in the first place.
Sure.
And I've talked to people who've worked in prisons that do not have that, don't seemingly have that compassion that you're talking about. Was it difficult, to be a prison officer and kind of go up against guys who were officers as well, but you guys had different philosophies about what the goal of prison was?
It is actually super simple. We don't agree on everything inside. There's a love that happens when you go to work in a prison, okay? And when an officer is down, when an officer needs help, they usually have a little red button on their radio or on their chest, and they hit it. And this sends an alarm through the prison. And you've never experienced as much love in your life till you've seen 60 people running at breakneck speed to save your life. And the problem for us is we get outside of prison and we expect that level of love out of everybody else. And who else gets the chance to show that you love somebody in that level? You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like,
Right.
I'm sure the military goes through the same thing, in combat. But so we put everything aside. We can sit there and fight. It's like the square on Friday night. We'll go down there and just get drunk and throw haymakers at each other. And then Monday morning, we're best friends again. When that alarm hits, everything goes out the window. And it's all about, because there's nobody else to run to your body alarm but the other officer inside that prison, inside those walls, inside those fences.
How often does that alarm go off?
Depends on the prison. Yeah. I mean, if you're working at Leavenworth, if you're looking at Missouri State Pen, every shift, a couple of 3 times a shift.
It has to be exhausting. Like, take like when someone hits a button, whether it's for whatever reason, like what happens next? Like, what's the procedure?
Wherever you're at, if you're in charge of a housing unit, you're going to start locking it down because containment's everything inside prison. Okay. I don't want it to spread. And there are times where people have staged a fight over here so that they can get everybody to run over here, and then they'll stab somebody over here. So we have to be aware of that. So if you're working in a housing unit, you lock it down, get your inmates put away. If you're in a position to run, you run. And you don't run, it's not a jog. It might be the first time. You can always tell somebody that's been at the bottom of the dog pile by how they run. Okay, because if they've ever been there, they're just knocking trees down to get to you. Because 5 minutes, I don't know if fights you've been in, but nobody goes 5 minutes.
No,
1 or 2 minutes on the ground is forever. And
most fights are over pretty quickly.
Yeah. So if you've ever experienced that, the towers, they're alert. They're looking for what's going on. Everybody, the whole institution stops. And I talk about this sometimes too. That's one thing that people don't understand about us. Law enforcement, they'll roll up on a scene. Once they get it quelled down, they'll put up some tape, they'll divert traffic and move on. Prison never stops. If I have a fight or a murder, I still got to feed 3,000 inmates. I still got to wreck these 60 in the seg unit. It never stops. So
it has to be exhausting that alarm going off several times a shift, right? I think that for everybody, for prisoners, for correction officers, for everybody, that just seems just life. It exhausts me every day, right? Just thinking about dealing with that.
Adrenaline. If you go to one of those places, we become adrenaline junkies. I'm not going to lie. You're not looking for it, but it just becomes part of who you are.
How does that carry over outside the prison once you go home? Like, if you're an adrenaline junkie, you're probably seeking it outside the prison too, right?
We're usually not good at that. We're and I'm just going to say this out loud. I'm saying this about myself. You're usually not very good at being the person you should be for the people you love.
Yeah.
Because we live in this foreign world and it becomes who we are. And we're adrenaline junkies. We're coffee drinkers. We've seen the worst in everything. We become cynical. And then we walk through the door and you have a 3-year-old grab your leg and go, "Daddy, you're home." And we don't know what to do with that. We've been wearing this face mask all day, so that people can't tell what we feel. And that 3-year-old looks up and she can't tell what you feel either. You block off your family, you block off the people you love. A lot of people drink, a lot of people, and my wife will tell you, when we'd go to parties, she's like, "I don't even know why I'm here. You guys sit there and talk about work. And if we don't work there," she says, "we just sit off in the corner. We have nothing because you guys live off that place that you work at." I'm married. I've been married 32. Don't quote me. I may get in trouble. 32, 33 years. That's super rare. Super rare.
And it sounds like working in news.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, it sure does.
Yeah.
I think that, it's interesting. Everything that you're describing about working in a prison and working outside of a prison, or you're living outside of a prison.
Sure.
This is not new. It's not mysterious. Like, governments, states, the federal government, they should know what you guys are. They know what you guys are going through. Like, is there any kind of infrastructure that is in place to help you through that? Any mental health, or is that just against the culture, or does it not exist? Does it exist?
It exists minimally.
Yeah,
I'm going to say it's getting better. We're more aware. I can tell you that as I came up through the ranks, I said I worked at a mental health place because there was a bunch of crazy inmates there.
Yeah.
So would I ever say I had a mental health problem? No, right. I'm not mental health. That's the way we look at it.
Right.
There are some programs that if you're having trouble, you can talk to your boss. They'll get you some help. It's supposed to be confidential. I saw a lot of times that it wasn't. I saw a lot of times that people would go there and it'd stop their promotions. Well, if you can't handle your family life, why would I make you a lieutenant who's running a shift in a prison? So the culture is to not ask for help. If you can, you become this very strong person, and you have to take care of things yourself in prison, and it's considered weak if you can't take care of it.
That's another similarity with the news culture. I mean, Andrew and I, spend a lot of our careers in news, like same culture. Like, you don't have, you always have to be the one who can take it, right? You always have to be the one who, send me, I can take it. And when you get back, all right, what's next? Like, I was fine, whatever, like
Mhm.
and I think in high intensity, high adrenaline fields like
Yeah,
prisons, news, law enforcement, that sort
sure.
of thing, where you see and deal with horrible things, there is a culture of that. And I wish there wasn't.
Yeah, I do too. You don't get the chance to decompress,
Yeah.
right? They just throw you back at the next one. I'm sure they do it to you guys. You roll up on a murder or something like that, and you see things that, the first time I saw an inmate bled out. I grew up on a farm. I have I have butchered deer. I've butchered hogs. I know what blood looks like. I
Mm-hmm.
did not know how much blood was inside a human being until I went to work in prison. You're not ready for that stuff, and nobody wants to talk about it. We laugh about it, we joke about it, dark humor. I'm sure you
Sure.
guys
No,
do
we
the
get
same
that.
thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
Yeah,
mean,
gallows
that's how you
humor,
get
man.
through it.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But
Michael, it's interesting. This leads to my next question, which is more of kind of just a talking point, but like, not to get bogged down into like prison policy, but oftentimes these prisons are in places and parts of the country where there's not a lot of jobs and there's
Mhm.
not a lot of economic opportunity, and so staffing, I'm sure, becomes difficult, becomes an issue. And the people that you do have that you're working alongside may not be prepared, as you said, for this kind of work. Is that true? Is that an accurate statement? It's just from what I understand, like it seems like that could be an obstacle in a lot of ways.
Well, let's talk about the first part of it, which is the politicians lining their pockets as opposed to caring what happens to the inmates or the staff that work there, because that's why we have prisons in places we can't staff.
Right.
On top of former coal mines in West Virginia. I mean, come on. But that's always their economic deal when they build a prison. It is a big economic deal. It brings in a lot of jobs. So they put it in these places where you don't have. One of my last jobs was opening up Thompson, Illinois, which was a prison that Illinois built but didn't fund, sat empty for 14 years. Then they gave it to the federal government, told us to open it. It wasn't up to our standards. We spent 3 years trying to open it, and it was in the middle of nowhere. And I hired 400 people. I will say, a lot of times I would rather have those guys that grew up in the country. I'd rather have someone who has very little experience, but if they have good character, that's that's what I need in a correctional officer. I could teach you to run a housing unit. I could teach you that kind of stuff. What I can't teach you is ethics. And if you don't have ethics, if you don't have that authenticity, like we talked about, you're not going to make it. You're going to get manipulated immediately, or you're going to get other people hurt. So I enjoyed, they talk a lot about the millennial generation. I hired 400, and this was in 2016, 2017, 400 people, and got some amazing people out of the middle of nowhere in Illinois and Iowa. So I don't think the staffing has to do with that, but the fact that they build those prisons in these places where there's nobody to hire, nobody lives there,
Right.
or at least 400 people don't, so I think that's the tough part, is that the prisons have a lot of political power in the pockets of senators. That's why you will never see one hardly ever close, because so much money flows in. The budget of the Bureau of Prisons last year was $8.3 billion. Think about that. That's huge. That's just the Bureau of Prisons. That's not state prisons. That's not county jails. That's not, any of that. But those senators love having a prison in their district because it brings this huge chunk of money and jobs and influence in.
And you mentioned the BOP, just kind of off the top of your head,
Sure.
a lot of that stuff's privatized too, right?
Not so much. Well, the BOP doesn't actually have anything to do with the private companies. Those are private companies.
Yeah.
So Trump used the private companies, and we were using them before that. Biden came in, I think, almost completely, if not completely, stopped that. It's not being used that much for to take BOP inmates. BOP has a good budget. They got 122 institutions. ICE, Border Patrol, Marshals. People don't realize how much inmates travel back and forth across the country for court. So that's a lot of the Marshal stuff.
Yeah.
So, and the number of county, because a lot of your county jails make money off of housing ICE and U.S. Marshal inmates. They get paid per day to have them in their county jail.
Right.
So that's also a form of privatization.
You know, would you say that the U.S. prison system writ large, I know this is a big question, would you say it's broken?
You know, people talk about this. The current Bureau of Prisons lady, she's come in. She really likes this Norwegian model, right? You guys know about that?
Yeah, I've
Over
heard about
there,
it.
it's treated more like a college, you know, and it's all about rehabilitation, and it's nice and fuzzy. And I'm going to give you my opinion. This may not be the opinion of everybody, but this is my opinion. So they try to enact that stuff. They want to call them residents. They don't want to call them inmates. They do all this fluffy stuff, is what I'm going to call it. Our country is not like Norway. Norway is mostly white, mostly middle or upper class, has a very low crime rate. Who lives in the United States? We've been at war since we started. We've had the wild, wild west, right? We've had the gangsters and mobsters of the 20s and 30s and Prohibition.
Americans aren't Norwegians, right?
Exactly. We're a violent country, and we have to have a way to control the people that step past that, right? Because the rest of us want to go, I want to go to work. I want to take my kids to the park. I want to do that kind of stuff. So how do we do that? And it forces us to take a larger percentage of the population and put them someplace where they can't hurt each other, because they won't follow the rules. They won't conform to the social mores, whatever. But to take our prison system and hold it up against somebody else's prison system, I think is not the right way to look at it, because we're not the same type of people. How many countries can you own 20 guns? Not very many. The United States.
Yeah, that's a really
forever.
good point. Yeah, I mean, we're obviously a very unique nation with very unique challenges, and quirks isn't the right word, but factors that make living here different.
Sure.
Like, if no system is perfect.
No.
But if you are in charge of the BOP, or if you are the prison czar, Michael Cantrell,
okay,
in charge of fixing all the prison system at the federal and state level, what are some of the big changes that you're making?
The first change is that I'm going to rely more on the digital technology that we have these days. Why do I have camps with no fence? At one time we had camps, and those inmates were low level, and they worked for, basically mowing the grass at the veterans home, and they kept up stuff, and it saved the government money. Now they're sitting there playing video games in a housing unit, and I'm paying, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year per inmate for them to sit here and do this. Put an ankle monitor on them with a GPS and send their ass to work. Okay? That's the first thing I'm doing. I'm getting, that's probably a quarter of our prison population. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to put them out there on the street. And if they violate, then they're going to stay in longer the second time. I do believe in rehabilitation. I do believe that everybody deserves second chances. Third, fourth, fifth, and sixth chances, I'm not so big on. Okay? I will spend the money to get you off drugs. I will spend the money to get you rehabilitated and retrained, and a vocation that will serve you and your family the first or second time. After that, you're going to prison, and I'll just warehouse them. Because if you can't do it one or two times with the full force of the money and government that we have, why am I going to do it third, fourth, fifth, sixth time?
So almost like a tiered level of prisoners.
It is for me. Yeah. And the other thing I'm going to do, and I don't care what religion, but all the churches and all the synagogues and all of them have this want to be a bigger part of the rehabilitation. Why not embrace that? Why not let them spend some of their money doing this?
Mm-hmm.
I've got guys that want to go through drug treatment, put an ankle monitor on them, send them over here to this church that's got a good program. There's one, I know a guy that just went through a program south of here in Arkansas, a religious-based program, and he's been dry for, 3-4 years now. Let them be part of this. I don't, and I'm going to take a lot of stuff away from them, okay? You should be working. You should be producing things that go back to the people who are paying to keep you in there. $8.3 billion. That's crazy. We used to do this more. We had broom factories. The prisons did all kinds of stuff for the war efforts, back in World War II and stuff. They made stuff. They saved the government money. And people say, well, that's like slavery. You're putting those inmates to work. No, I'm having them pay back the community for what they've done. And I see nothing wrong with that. To me, all that's just common sense stuff, but that's where I would start.
Is it possible to go to prison and be completely agnostic and not have to get aligned with a group?
Not get aligned with a religious group?
Any kind of group. I mean, again, so much of what people know and understand about prisons is what we see in TV and movies, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, you walk in, the door shuts behind you, and it's like, okay, well, you can either join this gang, this gang, this gang, this religion, or, which sometimes are both.
If I'm a white guy, if I walk in, do I have to immediately like, oh, hey, I got to join the Aryan Nation to survive? Like, I don't want to.
Right, exactly. Like, is it possible to just exist as you and not be in line with anybody?
Rarely. Lower custody minimums, low mediums, easier. You go up to a penitentiary, you walk into a penitentiary in California, your first meal, a white guy's going to come up to you and go, hey, I need you over here. We're going to talk to you about this. Well, I don't want anything to do with it. You're white, dude. That's all there is to it. You're not black. You're not Mexican. You're not Jamaican. You're not Honduran. You're white. So the white gang is going to grab you and take you and train you. The black gang's going to do the same thing.
Because it's a numbers game.
It's a numbers game. And
influence,
when the fights kick off, if you see gang fights and see pictures of it, guys that you see out there that may not be the, enforcer or whatever for that gang are going to jump out there and fight, and they're going to fight on the side of their race. You're not going to say the other race, oh, well, that makes sense. I'm going to help them. That's not going to happen.
Are the white gangs all Aryan Nation? I mean, is that how it works?
There's everything. Texas Syndicate, Aryan Brotherhood. There's so many breakdowns of the Aryan Brotherhood. At one time that was the biggest gang, but it was the RICO trials. The federal RICO trials broke up a lot of the Aryan Brotherhood and a lot of the Mexican mafia. Now we have all these smaller gangs: Texas Syndicate, Aryan Circle, Aryan, but there's just a lot of them that way.
Under the scenario where I have to go to prison, like, I was raised Jewish. My mom's not going to like it if I have to join an Aryan Nation. There's going to be a way out of it, right?
Right. If the fight kicks off, you're going to go on that yard and you're going to pick a side.
Yeah.
You're going to pick it based on race, no matter what your religion is. Yeah. Sitting it out could get you shanked. Picking the wrong side will get you shanked.
Well, so
you're going to get shanked either way.
Well, continuing to play
unless you fight.
Yeah.
Continuing to kind of think about this scenario where this is me, like, my first thought when you say that is like, I'd like to think I'm a better person than that, than having to choose a side, than having to get in the fight. But it sounds like I may not have a choice.
A lot of times they don't. And the number of guys, this is something that's not talked about too much. The number of guys who go into prison and look at, getting out in 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. And now they've been brought into a gang. And now they have to do something, or they have to jump in a fight. And now they stab somebody just hoping to make a point. And that guy dies. Now you got a murder charge and you spend the rest of your life in prison. That wasn't their plan.
And this kind of circles back to what I was saying before of like, when you walk in there, all of the principles, ethics, rules, laws, everything that you've been accustomed to as a civilian, it's gone. So in this scenario where Dan goes to prison, like, You're right, Dan, you are a better person than that. But once you've walked in there and the door shut behind you, that's the old Dan on the other side of the door.
I can't be a better person than that, it sounds
right.
like.
You have to, like, there's no choice. And
I will tell you,
I would never survive.
If you want some hope, if you're a very religious person, there's a possibility that you can get in with religious services. And there are guys who basically spend their whole time when they come out of the housing unit, they go to religious services, and they are kind of left alone.
I think that'd be my move. I think I could fake it for a while.
But
Yeah.
you can't owe anybody anything. You can't
Yeah.
want anything. You can't, that's what always gets them in trouble.
So, let's have a little fun here. I'm trying to be mindful of the time.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about all the shows and movies that we've all watched, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mayor of Kingstown. Is that even possible?
Wait,
shut up, Dan. I love that show.
For people who may not have watched, Andrew, describe the scenario when you're asking what is
essentially the prison is run by a couple of guys who live outside the prison, and they have a complete control over the entire staff of the prison, and it's the balance between them and a couple of gangs.
They're kind of local power broker civilians.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I've never seen anything like that. I could tell you that there might be somebody who influences a couple of, COs, paying them on the outside. We've had some bad COs. We've had gang members that have went through the whole deal to become a correctional officer for the simple reason they were trying to bring drugs into prison.
Yeah.
And they'll get caught, and that's how we found it out. But you might get a couple. There's no way. COs are the most stubborn, hard-headed, that you're going to get everybody in that prison to start listening to this dude on the outside who's not even in there to run to your body alarm, right? Why would you care about him?
Good point, yeah.
But I think if you go back to the, 1930s, 1940s, I think you may have a little bit more of that. You go to the parishes down in Louisiana, there was some, inmates getting farmed out to work for rich people in town. I think there was more influence brought into the prison from outside. What you see now is cell phones coming in prison. And nobody understands, most civilians don't understand how much of a problem that is. But now I've got gang members, top gang members sitting in prison that we're controlling. We've got them off the street. But somebody's smuggled in a cell phone. So now this guy's talking and giving hits out on the street and making decisions for the gang that's on the street. That's what I see more of.
Yeah.
Is the street being controlled from inside the prison.
Yeah. My fun question, I guess, is, when you watch movies or TV, like half of them seem to be about escape, right? Mm-hmm. How many prisoners are actually trying to escape? Like what kind of cat and mouse game is that from day to day?
Well, there's been several over the years, and I've been part and investigated some of them and saw some of them, chased a couple of them. I haven't ever got to be part of one of those that was that 6-month long.
Sure.
We're planning it. We're digging the tunnel. We're breaking out the rocks. So I've never got to see that.
But they're usually not that elaborate.
Right. Although if you want to escape from, darn. It's not Dana Mora. That's the other gal. Elmira.
The one in
Elmira,
Alabama?
New York. No, Elmira, New York. Look up the report on that. It is a fascinating read because it tells you the first step these two inmates made was a year and a half before they escaped, and it was talking a CO into selling them together. And you get to see every ounce of the manipulation that goes on for a year and a half until they escape out of that prison. And they caught him pretty, one guy broke his leg and they caught him pretty quick, but it's just a fascinating read, how they stole screws. There was a hammerhead. That's one of the things I remember. It was an 8-pound hammerhead. And for, I think they said 14 years, it has been used as a doorstop. And it was marked as a tool for a certain vocational deal there. One day it disappears. And everybody looked around and goes, oh, well, somebody finally threw that away. And I'm like, that's just crazy because what they'd done, the inmates had stolen that. That was what they used to chip through the wall, was this hammerhead that nobody paid attention to, although they all had walked by it every day. And so it's a fascinating read if you ever want to get into it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to read that this afternoon.
Maybe we do that as a Tuesday show.
Oh man.
Yeah. So I know we're running low on time, but I just want to give you a chance to tell us about your show. Tell us about your podcast and where people can find it.
Oh, absolutely. When I retired, I'm failing retirement horribly because I teach classes now for 3 different companies and I've got the podcast, but I'm enjoying what I do. But I wanted some way to just talk to people about the amazing people I worked with, There are amazing people who work in those prisons every day, who protect our fences and walls and keep the boogeyman away from your family. And they're the forgotten cops. You know, nobody understands what they do. And I appreciate you guys bringing me on here. And I know that people are going to go, oh, okay, well, that makes a little sense, I hope. And I hope the public recognizes how important these correctional officers are, because they're not just an afterthought. If you take a look at our justice system in the U.S., you have to have the law enforcement who enforces the laws. And then you have to have the judges who determine sentencing. And the final portion of that is the people who keep and enforce the sentence, and who keep those guys behind the wall and hopefully rehabilitate them and hopefully give them a chance, you know, not to come back to prison and to be productive, because most of them are going to come out and be our neighbors again. We all want them to get better and drop their criminality and start showing up at the PTA meetings. I mean, that's what we want, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So I want people to see that we're a part of that criminal justice system. So I've got over 100 shows now on the Prison Officer podcast. And I interview people from all levels of corrections, county, state, feds, officers, wardens, directors. We've had some really great conversations. www.theprisonofficer.com.
Yeah, and you can find the link to that in the description below. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening to this as a podcast, it'll be in the information for this show as well. And I'm just going to end this conversation with the question we'd like to ask everyone at the end. Mm-hmm. What didn't we ask you that we should have?
Oh, wow. I don't know.
If you're interviewing you, what would you ask that we didn't?
Wow, that's one of the toughest questions I think I've ever been asked. I think you guys did a good job. I mean, we talked a lot about all aspects of prison. You know, we hit most of it. I'm sure the minute we close this, I'll think of 3 things I should have said.
Yeah, and I'll think of 3 things I should have asked.
Okay. So I don't have an answer for that. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. We did a great job. I'll take that too.
You did do a great job.
No.
Well, I will also say, like, and I mean this 100% certainty, like, your podcast, like, I'm gonna subscribe like the minute I get off this call, because I'm gonna go back and listen, because this stuff has always been, like, you know, I've worked in the true crime space for a long time, and people are fascinated with the crime, the arrest, the trial, and that is all very interesting to me. But I've always really been into what happens after the sentencing, like how people go into the system, how they start to live their life. And it's just kind of fascinating to talk to people who are kind of on the front row of all of that. So we really appreciate your time, Michael.
Yeah, Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.